Kenjaku spent over 1,000 years building a plan that the Jujutsu world didn't even know existed until it was already too late. By the time they really understood the scope of it, he had already sealed their strongest sorcerer, occupied their political structures, and convinced 3 foreign governments to send soldiers. And all of it pointed towards one thing: distilling 100 million people into a form of cursed energy that has never existed before. When asked what was driving all of it, he gave 2 answers: fun and curiosity. They meant the exact same thing. So what exactly was the plan? How did he build it across 1,000 years without anyone stopping him? And why did the Jujutsu world end up sending a comedian to deal with him? Kenjaku had been building this plan for ages, and every time it was stopped, he rebuilt it. The version that ran through the series is the one that finally completed. Before Sukuna's death, Kenjaku divided Sukuna's soul into 20 cursed objects, his fingers, as a part of a binding contract between them. The knowledge he carried about fate, about the mechanics connecting Tengen to the Six Eyes, about the structure of the Jujutsu world at its deepest level, came from being present at that point in history before anyone in the current story existed. His original goal was forcing the merger between Tengen and the Star Plasma Vessel, a specific human born each generation to stabilize Tengen's evolution, at a much earlier point. It failed twice, both times because sorcerers with the Six Eyes stopped him. And after the second defeat, he killed the Star Plasma Vessel and then killed the next Six Eyes user shortly after birth. But both showed up again at the right moment regardless. The connection between Tengen, the Star Plasma Vessel, and the Six Eyes kept resembling itself every time he removed the people inside it. Killing the Six Eyes line over and over wasn't working, so he switched to sealing it instead. And that single decision is what made Prison Realm the center of the modern plan and what made Gojo the specific problem he had to solve before anything else could proceed. 12 years before the series, Toji Fushiguro, a sorcerer with no cursed energy, which meant fate had nothing to grip on him, disrupted the merger Kenjaku had arranged. He walked into a plan centuries in the making and broke it by accident. In an afternoon, he destroyed the connected destinies of Tengen, the Star Plasma Vessel, and the Six Eyes all at once, which cleared the blockage that had stopped Kenjaku for centuries. With him also came Suguru Geto, a young sorcerer who could manipulate cursed spirits. Kenjaku made a note of that body, and here's what that means. Kenjaku's entire operation across more than 1,000 years ran on one technique nobody else in the series had. He could transplant his own brain into another person's body. He opens a skull, removes the host's brain, inserts his own, and seals it. And every body that he occupies carries the same mark, stitching across the forehead. And when he takes a host, he inherits their innate technique and keeps it forever, even after he moves on. He's not one sorcerer, he's a stack of every sorcerer he has ever been. From Geto's body, he has cursed spirit manipulation, absorbing cursed spirits as small black orbs and releasing them in any combination he wants. Maximum Uzumaki concentrates a large number of stored curses into a single focused blast capable of tearing through anyone not specifically prepared for it. And this is what he shows in most of his fights. And Geto's body was the one he had been watching for 12 years. 6 years before the series, he secured Prison Realm. Everything was in place. He had the tools to seal Gojo. He had Geto's body. He had over 1,000 years of technique and patience behind him. So 3 pieces were in place, but there was one problem left. When Kenjaku kills Hazanoki near the end of the culling game, and Hazanoki asks him why he's doing any of this, Kenjaku said he believed life is about seeing what you haven't seen, and confirming whether what you think is interesting is actually interesting in real life. That is the honest answer. The culling game is not a power grab, it is a very large, very old experiment. The surface structure, 10 barrier colonies across Japan, players fighting each other for points, rules that can be modified by spending those points under conditions the game master must approve, is the apparatus. What it was building towards is something else entirely. And Kenjaku placed one binding vow on himself specifically. He's not the culling game's master. Killing him would not end the game. His barrier technique ability runs underneath every other part of the plan without ever being the part people focus on. He maintained all 10 colony barriers across Japan all at once for the full duration of the ritual. He held complete authority over the prison realm as a front gate bearer, making him the only person who could unseal it or impose conditions on it. After Tengen told him about the back gate's existence, he sank Prison Realm to the bottom of the Japan Trench, surrounded it with layers of seals and cursed spirits set up as detection traps. And the barriers keeping the game running were not just logistics, they were proof that nothing conventional could reach what he had built from the outside. During the culling game, the cursed energy being generated by the fighting, the barriers, and the deaths were being funneled towards one purpose: preparing the conditions for Tengen to be forced to merge with the Japanese population. Tengen's evolution had advanced to the point where they were more cursed spirit than human, and this made them a viable target for cursed spirit manipulation. A human who merges with Tengen evolves into something beyond a sorcerer, both present and absent from the physical world at the same time. Tengen manages this personally because their barrier techniques give them a structure for self-control after evolving. 100 million ordinary people in the same state without that framework would mean no individual boundaries between anyone. The impurities of 100 million people flooding outward simultaneously. What happened to Tokyo during the Shibuya incident would scale to the entire planet. That is what the game was building towards. Not eventual chaos, but immediate, total planetary collapse of the boundaries that make individual human consciousness possible. Every fight in the second half of the series was a response to this. Every desperate move, every sorcerer trying to stop something they only partially understood. All of it tracing back to 10 barriers running simultaneously across Japan. But even that is not the destination. Kenjaku explains this to Choso directly in the movie theater he builds inside an empty barrier before their fight. Yuki Sumuko has been researching Tengen independently. Her goal was sorcerers. Yuki's goal of optimizing cursed energy through Tengen Tengen would produce sorcerers, but Kenjaku doesn't want sorcerers. Because Tengen is more cursed spirit than sorcerer at this stage, the merger wouldn't produce sorcerers at all. It would distill 100 million people into a conglomerate of cursed energy capable of taking on any form. His domain, Womb Profusion, destroyed Yuki's simple domain entirely during their clash, and he expanded it without closing the outer barrier so that Tengen's plan to erase it from the outside couldn't work. He has always been chasing a new kind of cursed energy that goes beyond both cursed spirits and jujutsu sorcerers. The death painting wombs were an earlier attempt at that exact experiment, combining human and cursed spirit biology, and he was disappointed. The culling game is the same question scaled to 100 million people, and he genuinely does not know what the answer is. That's the whole point. He compares the feeling to a toddler holding a crayon in front of a blank paper. Sit with that for a second. A being alive for over 1,000 years, every major event in the jujutsu world shaped by his hand, and what he's describing is the feeling of standing in front of something he hasn't seen yet. That's genuine curiosity. To build a player roster across different eras, he offered incarnation deals to sorcerers throughout history, binding their souls to cursed objects for eventual release into the game. 400 years ago, he found Kashimo after a battle on a field covered in bodies. Kenjaku told him Sukuna was the strongest being he had ever encountered, a sorcerer from nearly 1,000 years earlier, and Kashimo agreed to become a cursed object and wait for centuries just for that fight. The angel struck her deal with him much earlier on for her own reasons, and others across different eras did the exact same. The game's roster was built across multiple lifetimes, and while it ran, Kenjaku was also doing everything else simultaneously. After the Shibuya incident, Noritoshi Kamo went back to the Kamo main house to try and use a conservative faction against Kenjaku. The attendant at the door no longer recognized Noritoshi. She had actually been manipulated into believing she was living 150 years in the past. Noritoshi went deeper into the house and found Kenjaku sitting in the master bedroom. Kenjaku told him the Tokyo Metro being down explained why he was later than expected. The conservative faction had already been cleared out. The execution orders for Geto's body and Yuji had already been rescinded. He had already made himself the 25th head of the Kamo clan. When Noritoshi activated his technique, Kenjaku didn't treat it as a fight. He laughed and told him to leave. And that was all domestic. Internationally, he spent 9 months meeting with governments across the world. He revealed the existence of jujutsu, framed cursed energy as an alternative power source, gave officials glasses that let them see cursed spirits, and showed them surveillance footage from Kokichi Muta's network as evidence. He passed through White House security by defeating security forces using a cursed spirit, then dropped the dog tags of the soldiers he had killed in front of the president, and opened talks about deploying military forces to Japan. When the US general said one company of soldiers would handle it, Kenjaku didn't argue. He had already made the same offer to other governments, and his actual goal was never military cooperation. Urame asked about this and he told her, the military was insurance. He just needed the Tokyo and Sendai colonies to have enough cursed energy for the merger preparation. He didn't even expect the soldiers and the sorcerers to actually have a real showdown. He predicted the soldiers would retreat once casualties mounted, and it wouldn't be worth the points for players to chase non-sorcerers. And he was totally right. Every conventional move had an answer before anyone thought to try it. Every structure had already been worked around. The conservative faction, the military option, the 6-size line. Each one addressed, sealed, or turned into a tool years before it became relevant. By the time the jujutsu world would understand what it was facing, the only angles that hadn't been covered were the ones that didn't look like angles at all. Kenjaku was managing all of this simultaneously: international diplomacy, active ritual maintenance, personally hunting culling games players to end the game faster, all in service of a plan 1,000 years in the making. And, to fix this, the jujutsu world sent a comedian. The gap between what he knew and what the sorcerers opposing him knew was not a power gap, it was a time gap. He had been running this for so long that by the time anyone understood the full scope of it, most of it was already done. To fix this, the angel recommended Fumihiko Takaba, not a sorcerer, a comedian. And the reason that worked is the same reason nothing else did. Meimei tried Bird Strike against Kenjaku after defeating the smallpox deity with it. It didn't land and she barely got out alive using Wiwi's technique. Kasumi Miwa's sword broke in his guard. The conservative faction was gone before anyone tried to use it. Gojo couldn't pursue Kenjaku directly because he was sealed in Prison Realm during the Shibuya incident. After being freed, Gojo immediately confronted Kenjaku, but Sukuna intervened to protect his own interests. The one sorcerer who could have ended it in an afternoon never got the fight, but Takaba's technique, comedian, makes reality bend to what Takaba believes is funny. It has no interaction with cursed energy levels or technique compatibility. It simply rewrites the terms of the fight. Kenjaku summoned a special grade cursed spirit. Takaba was completely unharmed. Kenjaku fired attacks and they didn't connect. He found himself agreeing with Takaba that the most thrilling thing is when the comedian who was only there to stretch out the cast ends up stealing the show. Takaba couldn't kill him though, but he wore him down long enough that Todo used Boogie Woogie to swap Yuta Akatsu into a position beyond Kenjaku, and Yuta decapitated him. Kenjaku died before the final stage ran to completion. The merger didn't happen. The 100 million didn't collapse into a conglomerate. The experiment didn't produce a result. But the plan's fingertips were everywhere regardless. Everything that made Yuji a viable vessel for Sukuna came from Kenjaku possessing Kaori Itadori, Yuji's mom, whose body gave him anti-gravity system and whose pregnancy gave Kenjaku the vessel he needed. Yuji was created by Kenjaku's design to be Sukuna's vessel, a plan that ultimately turned against him when Yuji fought to stop Sukuna. When Hazanoki asked what was driving all of it, Kenjaku said life is about seeing what you haven't seen. He had been alive for over 1,000 years and he was still looking, still curious, still holding the crayon. It's almost ironic, but even the technique Yuta used to inhabit Gojo's body at the end was Kenjaku's own brain transplant method, copied and turned back on everything he built.